Good evening. Welcome to the April 4th Troy City Council meeting. We are pleased to have with us this evening Father Philip Pavic from the St. Lucy's Croatian Catholic Church, who will provide us with an invocation, and that will be followed by the Pledge of Allegiance. Please rise. Father, if you'll come to the mic.
May I just say a word of introduction? I wear two uniforms. I have a brown robe with a white rope. I belong to the Franciscan order founded by St. Francis of Assisi back in 1209. And we serve the St. Lucy Parish up here around the corner because my mother and father came from that country of Croatia, and I'm a first generation immigrant son. So I am happy to be able to be here. I'm also an ordained priest in the Roman Catholic Church, so I'm wearing two hats tonight. But I would like to pray in the spirit of my founder, the famous and holy Francis of Assisi, who is known for his great love of nature, and for this particular special prayer, a prayer for peace, which I think you can all apply to your wonderful work for this city of Troy. I'm not a citizen here. I'm visiting from Chicago in our unfortunate situation of having a retirement of the pastor, and I'm just filling in, but I'm happy to be here. Lord, make me an instrument of your peace. Where there is hatred, let me sow love. Where there is injury, pardon. Where there is doubt, faith. Where there is despair, hope. Where there is darkness, light. And where there is sadness, joy. O Divine Master, grant that I may not so much seek to be consoled as to console, to be understood as to understand, to be loved as to love. For it is in giving that we receive. It is in pardoning that we are pardoned. And it is in dying that we are born to eternal life. And may the Lord Almighty bless you in your work. May his blessing descend upon you and upon this council, that you may continue your service for the welfare of this whole community of Troy. We ask this through Christ our Lord. Amen.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you, Father. We appreciate you coming this evening, and hope that your stay here in Troy is enjoyable. Thank you for that lovely prayer. May we have the roll call, Mrs. Bittner?
Mayor Schilling?
Here.
Councilmember Beltramini?
Present.
Fleming?
Here.
Howlerlack?
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Kerwin?
Here.
Councilmember McGinnis?
Here.
And Slater?
Here.
Quorum present. This evening we begin with a special presentation, and that is the City of Troy Employees Casual for a Cause program for the months of January and February 2011, and our Community Affairs Director, Cindy Stewart, who is doing the Casual for a Cause. Some of the employees like this program so much they've been doing it extra days so that they can give extra money.
Well, it's for Japan and the Red Cross.
Yes, I was going to say so not only is this presentation this evening for this group, the Nature Center Society, but many other worthy causes. So thank you, Mrs. Stewart.
Well, it's my pleasure to be here tonight. And for January and February, as the mayor said, we raised $771 for the new Troy Nature Society. So do you want to say a few words? This is John Reagan.
Thanks.
I think he wants
He's smart.
Yes.
Get the check before he talks.
Get the check, and then we'll talk later, yes. Good evening, council, staff. This money is going to go towards the education of our children in the city of Troy and surrounding area to increase their knowledge and the understanding of natural environment. Thank you very much.
You're very welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you. Before we proceed on with the regular agenda, I do need to tell people, if you came on the Waddles Road change of speed limit, that is not on tonight's agenda and won't be on till sometime probably in May, because that area of Waddles Road is being restudied, and so there will be there's no agenda item or no vote on that item of the change of the speed limit on Waddles Road this evening. Some of the people that emailed, I did respond to those people, but some people may have come this evening not thinking that it was still going to be on the agenda. So I make that announcement. There are no carryover items. You're welcome. But you're welcome to stay if you want. I just want you to know. There are no carryover items or public hearings this evening, and so we'll go right to public comment. And as you know, public comment is on agenda items or items that are not on the agenda, and limited to 5 minutes per speaker. Unless we have more than 15, then it's a shorter time. So I'll begin calling on those in the order that they signed up. And the first one is Fred Eckhout. So is Fred here? Yes.
Good evening. I'm Fred Eckhout, plus 25-year resident and business owner here in Troy. And I just want to say that I and a large part of the Troy community are shocked that you as a group have not done more to prevent the closure of the library. There have been countless speakers at this microphone voicing their support for the library. Children have started petitions to keep the library open. Over 2,000 residents petitioned for the library, 4 ballot proposals, and yet nothing has been done to prevent the library's closure. The city's financing appears to be improving. You've just saved $300,000 in pension contributions, and this may grow by the end of the year. You have $1.5 million in operating transfers coming in from the cancellation of capital projects. You're only using 18% of the general fund to balance the budget. You only need $1.3 million to fund the library. Within this $57 million budget, and with all this money sloshing around, it's really surprising that the group of you haven't made any real concerted effort to find library funds, despite public proclamations that each of you support the library. Now, Martin has made resolutions in an attempt to keep the library doors open, only to be shot down and not encouraged, largely by this side of the table. We don't want a tax hike, and we won't stand to have valuable services cut. What we want is for you to find a way to live within our means while providing valuable city services. I think when it comes to November, we'll see. We'll just let the voters decide who's really representing their constituents in this endeavor. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Richard Peters. Mr. Peters?
Good evening, Mayor.
Good evening.
Yeah, Council. First, I want to say Dr. King's birthday's today, and I'm sure we all have memories of that. Most of us do.
Mr. Peters, do you want to adjust the microphone for you? Because some people at the back couldn't hear. Go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to reiterate this Dr. King's birthday, and some of us who experienced his lifetime, have rather fond memories of this courageous man. I got a couple things. One is the lights in this city, on the stoplights. It seemed, in fact, even got in an accident, I don't know how long ago, about half a year ago maybe. I'm sitting at a light and somebody's come up and hit, but these school stoplights, now, do they have to be going all the time? I think what they do is they interrupt traffic, and in fact, they cause a consumption of fuel, and I don't think they're very good for the atmosphere as well. And I think that the city should re-examine this, particularly along Rochester Road. I can tell you that light by the DPW, should it be on all the time? And even some of the lights, like down here at 17, we have 4 lights now, and in my mind, some of those lights could run, say, from 7 to 9 during rush hour, but before that, there's really no reason for that. And so that's kind of, and also, I believe last week you had something about purchasing vehicles, new vehicles for the city. I don't know if that was on there or not. I just wondered if we could have purchased half of them and how fuel efficient they were, and if that, we could have saved some of that money for the library, library. So, okay, now I want to get on to something else here. I remember President Kennedy said, you should never fear to negotiate or negotiate out of fear. Now, it seems to me like these countries like Libya and some of these other countries, we're spending our money on jets and warplanes over there, and these people want to keep going at it where the Gaddafi forces, they want to negotiate. Now, I think that's sort of stupid, to tell you the truth. And some of these other countries like Bahrain and that, I think that these leaders want to negotiate, and I think that they're going to have a democracy anyways. That's stupid to me that they should not do that. Also, one other thing about Afghanistan. I'm beginning to believe that we might want to consider pulling out of there if Karzai can't control those hotheads over there who want to take people's heads off, and in my mind, it might be somebody else's head that's going to roll if they pull the stuff out of there. So. And hopefully these folks will do something about our budget for the thing there, and hopefully cooler heads will prevail. Thank you.
Next, we're going to hear from Kelly Essman.
Hi.
Good evening.
How are you?
Good.
I want to talk about there's a piece of property, a remnant on Rochester Road that's on the, it's going to be up for discussion tonight only. And I have some information. Could I?
If you'll give it to the clerk, then they'll pass it along to us. Thank you.
I'm here in behalf of a friend of mine, Robert Guerreri from Castlemark Homes. We together were trying to purchase the property off of Heartland and Rochester Road. And about 7 months ago, not that we were promised it would be a sure thing, we were discussing it as a very probable possibility, and providing the city did an appraisal, and Mr. Guerrero was willing to pay what the appraised amount was, that it was likely that the sale would be able to take place. In this information, we've got a sketch that would show that remnant piece and a little house that's behind it. And the property owner of the house entered into an agreement to sell that, subject to Mr. Guerreri being able to purchase this remnant. And then together, his goal would be, once this purchase is made, we've been talking to the parcel behind it, which is the Mason Lodge, and they haven't exactly said they would sell, but they indicated that they're willing to, and that they would be willing to discuss it with us. And Mr. Guerreri's plan would be, one, to try to work something out that would be a combined effort for that whole piece of property. And if they're not able to work something out with the lodge, then of course this plan would be executed almost immediately to put up this 2,800 square feet. It would be retail and it would be speculative, but we think that there's the opportunity to find a tenant for that building when a reasonable period of time would exist. Without the house, however, this remnant would only accommodate a small little building, and we thought that this made sense. But the problem that we have right now is because the council hasn't decided on whether or not to sell or hold the property, Mr. Guerreri and the owner of the house, which makes all this work, entered into an agreement on an option, and he's got money invested already with the property owner waiting for a decision on being able to purchase this front parcel. And it seems that it makes sense to sell this front parcel because by itself you're only going to be able to do about 800 to 1,000 square foot building, and by adding the house before it gets sold to some residential user, right now with the timing, you should be able to, this last piece of paper on here shows the Oakland County Public Records for the address on 3176 Rochester Road. This is just in here as an example. That would be the Buscemi's on the north side of, and this would represent a very similar size building that we're talking about right now. And if you look at the tax that it would generate is about $10,000 a year, as opposed to this remnant not even being on the tax roll right now. I know the thought would be, do we need to sell it now, or should we wait, hope that the market improves? But it's just a little tiny piece of property. And by not selling it right now and generating the $50,000 or some $1,000 plus the $10,000 a year in taxes, not to even mention the personal property taxes, every year this property would probably have to go up in value 200% in order to match what you'd be losing by not taking the deal right now. So I'm here hoping that the board can take this into consideration, that it is based on a third-party appraisal. The city ordered the appraisal. Mr. Guerreri is willing to pay the price that the appraised value was, and if he's not able to get a decision and get this decided on right away, the opportunity to purchase that house will be lost. More than likely some residential person will buy it and move into the house, and that really won't be the best case scenario for the remnant. So I'm just here to ask that if you guys could look at it more seriously and try to give us an answer, we'd appreciate it.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks.
Next we'll hear from Dan Brake.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Caught me unawares. I didn't realize you had such a short list tonight. I attended last Wednesday evening's Marty Nolenberg meeting at the community center, and I know several of you were across the hall, so you know what I'm going to speak of, where he attempted to explain our governor's proposed budget. He was only trying to explain what is proposed, not defend it or champion it. But he was repeatedly shouted down by a raucous mob of Troy School District teachers. One, for example, shouted out, "If I don't get a bigger pay raise, my friend who dropped out of college is going to be making more than I am. What's fair about that?" Besides being left wondering why my son has to be exposed to teachers with this sort of behavior problem and no aptitude for reason or logic, I came away wondering, well, how much do teachers make anyway? On the TSD website, I found out there's a wonderful report there titled TSD Salary and Benefit Transparency Reporting. This report lists each TSD employee who received a W-2 for 2009. Only by job title, no one is identified directly, and it lists pay received and the cost of each of the benefits for the year for each employee. I've given you a sample in my pass out. Those poor TSD teachers are trapped in dead-end jobs that in 2009 topped out at over $105,000 of direct pay and over $150,000 per year when benefit costs are included for part-time work on 191 days per year. My point in all this for you is that this is an awesome report as far as truly informing the people about what is really going on in government budgets these days. So please direct the city manager to publish a similar report on city employees for on the City of Troy website. The people who are paying the bill are truly entitled to it, and what could be more fair than that? And while you're at it, how about publishing the complete list of survey questions from the ridiculous and expensive telephone survey? Or was that really a political advertisement just completed? What could be more fair and informative than giving the public those questions? I had the opportunity to be surveyed, and that thing was nothing but a thinly disguised attempt to scare the uninformed into more yes votes to come up for our next umpteenth new millage election sometime in the future, and all paid for with $22,000 of the people's money. Our library has 21 days of operation left before it closes. And it was 4 of you, Mayor Schilling, Ms. Kerwin, Ms. McGinnis, Mr. Slater, who voted for this budget that closes our library. And you've stuck to it through failed millage elections and endless hours of public discussion. You even sued Ed Kempen and the rest of us so that we never would have the chance to vote on your budget decision. You have trumped all logic that concludes there is enough money available to keep the library open by saying you'll only rescind your library death sentence if the people give you new property taxes. You insist, nevertheless, that you do support the library and wish it could stay open. Clearly, irreparable harm will come from closing it, dispersing its staff, severing its connections to the community and to all the various institutions it has contacts with. Yet here we stand, barely 3 weeks from the end. Which one of you is going to campaign in November on your own behalf or on behalf of another as the library closer? Who can possibly imagine any council candidate running in November on the campaign promise of "I'll keep the library closed"? Or how about "I'm endorsed by the same people who closed the library"? It's probably not going to happen. It's been calculated that the actual incremental cost of keeping the library open to year end is only about $750,000. That's the amount over and above the unavoidable costs of building and contents upkeep and maintenance that will be incurred if the library is open or closed. So you four will destroy this treasured resource of our city in order to prove to the people of Troy that we better not ever again dare to say no to one of your big taxing, big spending, big government millage proposals. I urge you not to do that. Please resolve here and now this evening when you take up this budget yet again to find the good grace to leave the library open until year end so that whatever new council takes your place come November will have more than a ghost to start from. Does any one of you really want your political legacy to be "I closed the Troy Library"? Thank you.
Next, we'll hear from Paul Beck.
With the
Good evening.
permission of council, I'd like to pass on my time. Thank you.
Oh, yes, thank you. Irv Wingrove?
Well, now I know why I have to speak tonight. So first of all, I'd like to thank council for the community engagement sessions. They were an excellent opportunity for quality questions and answers. At our table, we had much discussion about this $1.7 million that we keep hearing being discussed, being taken out of our rainy day fund to pay for the library. But as we dissected that proposal, we quickly became aware that that money has already been reallocated to more pressing needs for the next 2 years' budget. That money and much more. So that money is long gone in today's parlance. So after that, we were joined by Bob Gosselin, our county commissioner. And the first words out of his mouth, well, the city's got this $1.7 million they can use for the library if they want it. So we challenged him on that, and his response, well, you can always cut more expenses. But he did not acknowledge the comparison between the 2009 and the 2011 budget, which showed that our overall headcount is down 47%, nor did he acknowledge that Mr. Zerlag has been tasked to implement an across-the-board 10% cut in compensation package. We also heard about this library for $1.4 million, but if you read the library director's memo, that $1.4 million buys you 15 hours, no programming, no interlibrary loans, no computers. All we hear from the TCU group, quite frankly, is criticisms. Cut, cut, cut. Always criticisms, never positive. So on trust, at our website, trusttroy.org rather, we try to answer those questions. And as soon as we answer those, they pop in with a few more questions. Most recently, we heard that they suggest that Mr. Zerlag give up his pension so he can cut the grass more often. They also, on their flyer, said we don't need the police at the back of this council chambers. So it really has become a theater of the absurd with them. So why do they repeat this 1.7 over and over again? It's simple to me. They need to blame someone else other than themselves for closing the library. Remember, this is the group that took pride in defeating Proposal 1. You remember those 3 phony proposals on the ballot. You remember the petition and the Councilman Harlech's resolution, which he said was vastly superior to Proposal 1, neither of which passed the sunlight test. So in retrospect, Proposal 1 was the only viable solution to keep the library open. But now they're backing away from that, saying their part was, quote, minimal, end quote. I'm sorry, you can't have it both ways. But it's not just Proposition 1. Remember the 1.9 millage last year. They tried to scare us on that one, making us believe that taxes were going up 29%. In reality, the 29 was only on the small city operating fund. In my household, that would be $180 this year. Small price to pay for full services that we've come to expect. And a lot of people don't realize that council's hands are tied in this matter because the millage cap passed in 2008. On the face of it, it sounds fine. Let the people decide if they want a millage. But of course, when council and the library folks try to do exactly that, the TCU used every dirty trick in the book to defeat that millage. One of their leaders, Frank Harlech, actually was quoted in the Oakland Press. You can say we were one of the main reasons, referring to the defeat of the 1.9. These combined efforts by TCU have gutted the city to the point that council cannot give us what we expect: police, parks, community center, snow removal, pothole repair, and of course the library. So it's hypocritical for TCU to criticize council for not delivering these when TCU bears the responsibility. My question to Mr. Gosselin that night, as it is to the Harlechs and TCU, is when is enough enough, to the point that you will actually support something positive? Tell us the benchmarks you'll use to make that decision. And just saying we'll know it when we see it doesn't work anymore. It really is time for the citizens of Troy to take back control of the city from the extremists. Has not the Anti-City Services Group punished us enough? Have not they punished us enough? Thank you, Mayor.
Next, we're going to hear from James Savage. Good evening.
Good evening, Mayor, City Council. I listened in on some of the discussions at the community center over the last couple of weeks, and some of the comments I heard was there's a lot of information or lack of information and misinformation. Actually, I had gone to the center last week to hopefully to get some answers from Mr. Nolenberg on the film industry tax or whatever it is. It seems like everybody I talk to has a different version on what that issue is. But it was just an example of how things get mixed up, because if you talk to a dozen people, they will have a dozen different answers on what this film subsidy is. And now at last week's meeting, there were 2 points of view regarding the transit center. There was mine and another gentleman, and I think mostly the feeling was that we were on opposite sides, but in fact, I think if we would got together, we would agree on like about 90% of what we talked about. As you know, I have spoken many times in opposition to spending money on building the transit center. The other speaker seemed to be in favor of the center, but spent most of his time espousing the benefits of mass transit. Now, I don't know where that gentleman's been the last 10 or 12 years, but I have attended many meetings right here in this building to discuss transportation. And most of these were called by the Michigan Department of Transportation and various consultants and that to discuss transportation. And many of the people, including myself, have tried to talk about mass transit, but all the officials did not want to talk about mass transit. They didn't even want to talk about a commuter lane. We have had a train system for many years. The tracks are there, the trains run every day, and all we need to do is to improve on what we have. I have family members who often travel from Royal Oak to Chicago by train. The obvious first step, if we're going to improve the transit system in Michigan, would be a high-speed train from Ann Arbor to Chicago. Trains have traveled at 100 miles an hour for over 75 years. There are many trains in the world going over 200 miles an hour now. We just have to improve on what we have. Most of the people who support the transit center only ever talk about building the complex. They don't talk about moving people. I know you are fed up with hearing me bring this subject up, but I'm still not getting the answers to questions like, are we still paying lobbyists $4,500 a month to get tax money from Washington, which is not there? Do people of Troy really want this transit center at whatever price? I would like to see a public forum held where the public could get answers from the officials responsible, and if possible before November. We can now get a train from Troy or Royal Oak to Chicago. They're running every day now. But it takes a long time. The trains are slow, and building the Troy Center is not going to speed the trains up. There are many areas where we could improve our quality of life without spending millions of dollars, by just improving on what we have. And if you look around, there are enormous things. It seems like we cannot do anything unless we're going to be throwing millions of dollars at the problem. And the problems are right here on the ground. They don't need millions of dollars. Simply a change in time and traffic signals would improve the traffic flow, and I can list quite a few of those. A winter skating pond on the city park. We've talked about it how many years? 6, 7 years? And it never happens. The quality of life should not be measured in millions of dollars. Thank you.
Next, we'll hear from John Witt. Good evening.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. I want to comment on item I-4 on today's agenda, which is the revised 3-year budget. Once again, this budget includes no funding for the library. Thus, it's pretty simple. A vote for this budget is a vote to close the library. There's really no way around it. A yes vote is voting to shut down the library. Now, what's really troubled me and a lot of residents since the November election has been the approach taken by city management and a majority of the council about exploring options to keep the library open. Instead of seriously considering the options to keep the library open, council and management has dug in and been insistent on closing the library. In fact, at times it has seemed like it has been more important to the council and management that the library does indeed close, a closure that has been threatened to the residents for 18 months if they did not vote to raise their own taxes, than it has been to responsibly manage the city's budget. For example, shortly after the November election, this council, with direction from management, sued its own residents to prevent their will from being done. You did this because you knew the true will of the residents of Troy is a library with no new taxes. This had to be stopped as it did not fit in with your plans. Then, in February, when Mr. Hollerak pointed out several areas in the budget where money was available to fund the library, city management aggressively defended their "we must close the library" position and showed no willingness to even consider any of Mr. Hollerak's reasonable proposals. So why is this council and administration so insistent on making sure our library closes? I will let others decide that, but I will tell you that it does not have to be this way. Tonight you can change course, vote no on this budget, and start looking at the very real options within the budget that can keep the Troy Public Library open. Or you can vote yes and show once again that you are committed to making sure the library closes. It is your choice, and I ask you to choose wisely. Thank you.
Next we'll hear from Linda Kaima. Good evening.
Good evening, Mayor, Council. We live in a very diverse community, yet we don't know much about many of them. There's so many cultures. Unfortunately, it took a monumental, catastrophic event to learn something about the culture of Japan. That culture showed a stellar example of handling a crisis. Maybe we could take examples from that. A Japanese nationalist was interviewed on television indicating that the Japanese culture thinks of family and community first, whereas in America, we think of ourselves first. That's unfortunate. With that in mind, an extreme example of that is Troy Citizens United. They're not looking at the good of the community, but rather getting elected. To make it worse, there is a recent Facebook page asking people to boycott the Troy Somerset Gazette and its advertisers, citing coverage of the November Gary Peters election. If it was such an issue, why are they waiting till now to bring it up? Are they threatened by something now? Is the truth coming out? This publication has served this community for 31 years. Now they're being attacked. This is nothing more than another TCU initiative to stop the truth from being published. Could it be the citizens of Troy are waking up to their games? Boycott the advertisers and jeopardize their livelihood and the commercial industry in the city, further reducing revenues? Does that make sense? Let's see if they stop using it to advertise their events. Another point, at a recent community engagement meeting, Frank Howlerlach said Bob Dado, who works with Brooks Patterson, and he's his right-hand man, indicated that Standard & Poor's and Moody's indicated Oakland County and Troy received their AAA bond rating because they didn't raise taxes. When I said that wasn't true, he said Bob said it. I said maybe it was part of a sentence or conversation. In fact, Frank insisted that was what Bob said. I indicated I would call Bob and verify, so I did. Here's what he said. He never said and never would have said that. Raising taxes has nothing to do with the AAA bond rating. There are 4 criteria they look at. 1, financial strength, which is cash and equity, how strong you are today. 2, how much outstanding debt do you have? 3, business practices and policies. That's accounting practices, ability to react to issues and how they reacted in the past. And 4, economic environment in which you live. We're between Flint and Detroit, our reliance on the auto industry, our dependence on the state, etc. Standard & Poor's and Moody's always tweak the weight they put on each of these criteria. They are not equally weighed. The most weight is on the economic environment. S&P and Moody's are thrilled with our 3-year budget. He also indicated Oakland County has a leeway or cushion in their millage, which they are not raising, but it helps gain a favorable rating for your bond rating, since you have the ability to react to unfavorable situations. We used to have that, but it was taken away by TCU in their tactics when they changed the charter amendment. So again, we have another lie from TCU. Are these the type of people you want to rely on for information and put your future and the future of your city and your property values in the hands of? Get your information. Use logic. It was said employees were at the community engagement meetings. Aren't some of our employees also residents? It was said it was a biased survey. How could a company stay in business all these years if they did biased surveys? Again, get your information. Use logic. Thank you.
Next, we'll hear from Christine Hill.
Good evening, Council, City staff. I'm excited. I get 5 minutes tonight. It's usually 3 minutes or so many people. As a 21-year resident, I have been and remain a cheerleader for this wonderful city. It has always been well-regarded, well-managed, and a great place to live and to raise a family. There are many like me, and lately I talk with more and more citizens who are very concerned about our community's future. With declining tax revenues, you are forced to make difficult and unpopular decisions. However, you have been diligent in establishing best practices and keeping as strong as possible for as long as possible our core services. In fact, Michigan's budget director has said that Troy is to be applauded in that effort. Please know that many in the community are aware of the necessity of these cuts in the current economic environment, and we know you must each year present a balanced budget to the state. Knowledgeable and forward-looking citizens understand that with less revenue, we can expect less staffing and fewer city services. In the recent engagement sessions, there have been many discussions about the budget, the lack of appropriate funding, and the knowledge that our millage rate of 9.5 is simply too low to allow for many of the amenities we previously enjoyed. Many citizens state that they would support a higher, more reasonable millage level, especially when looking at the higher millage rates of the cities all around us. Troy's is simply too low, and as a result, will continue to experience more and more cuts over the 3-year budget cycle. Continuing cuts that will affect everything from road maintenance to police staffing, from parks maintenance to recreation programming, loss of our library and our nature center, loss of much of our feeling of community. We realize this is not a spending issue. Far from it. It's a revenue issue. So on one hand, we have citizens who are becoming engaged in learning exactly what's happening and why, and willing to work together with you toward making changes for the better. On the other hand, we have a group of residents who continue to belittle, criticize, and mistrust council members and city management, totally disregarding your proven exemplary fiscal management and your ability to meet the revenue challenge head-on. That group appears to be fairly small in numbers, but loud and belligerent nonetheless, and I'm left to wonder what their ultimate agenda could possibly be. Why put so much time and energy into trying to tear apart the structure of the very community where they live, thus ensuring decimation of their own property value and the property values of the rest of us in the process? To all of you at the helm, please know that the message is spreading that our city is facing a huge revenue crisis, and more citizens are stepping up to their civic responsibility in learning what's happening, what needs to happen, and learning that they can trust what you are doing. We are all in this mess together and must find the solution together to restore some semblance of community to our community. Thank you.
Next, we'll hear from Thomas Burke. And after Tom, then his wife, Deb DeBacker. So, Deb, do you want to come around? So, right after Tom speaks, you can speak.
I really appreciate all the commercials, the trust people put on for TCU at each one of these meetings, because every time they talk, we get more supporters, because no one really believes that stuff, do they? You know, what's trust stand for? Troy Residents United for some more taxes? Because that seems like the only solution to anything. But my comment tonight is, the library closes within a month. We had all these nice kumbaya engagement sessions where Each table had a couple people from Trust and one or more from TCU, and they'd talk about things, and some other people were there trying to make sense of all that. What did that accomplish? Library's still going to close. We took a fancy poll. We hired a well-known push-poll operator who does a great job of biased surveys. Heck, that's one of the reasons why these guys are in business. They ask you what you want to find out, skew it in that direction. Whatever the answer of the survey is, the library will still close in 30 days. No matter if you're a member of Trust or TCU, the library will close within 30 days because 4 individuals want the library to close unless monstrous gobs of good money are thrown after bad. All TCU is asked is what one individual who wasn't a Trust member or a TCU member said at one of the meetings. I'd be willing probably to pay for additional tax after the city right-sized the salaries and benefits of its employees to be commensurate to what he got paid in the private sector. And until that happens, no one will pay for a tax increase. Remember, the 1.9 mils went down by 70% of the voters saying no. It wasn't a few members of TCU voting no and everybody else voting yes. You're going to have a budget vote tonight. Any one of the 4 of you can change this budget, the budget that's put up by management that has a vested interest in the status quo. You know, I've raised it several times. Many others have said up here, there's money in the budget. The library is not that significant, but it's become the post of no change. The library must close in order for you to prove yourselves right. So I hope the people who voted for the 4 of you are happy in 30 days when the library changes, or you could prove somebody wrong. You could make $1 million change to the budget. In fact, make a couple $1 million changes to those budget tonight. Make them for anything, even if it's not the library. Change the budget. Don't just rubber stamp it. I dare you. It will never happen. Thank you.
Deb DeBacker is our next speaker. Good evening.
Hello, Mayor and Council. First of all, I'd like to say that Troy Citizens United has nothing to do with the Troy Somerset Gazette Facebook boycott, the Troy Somerset Gazette. That's started by some person from Rochester Hills. So that's another one of those trust me liars. I'm so sick of them coming up here and just criticizing, ripping on, calling people liars. How could any one of our citizens trust a group that has nothing constructive to say, but just constantly calls people liars, tells lies about them? They're just despicable people when some other person has constantly, like Troy Citizens United, constructive ideas to present to this council. But that's what you get for people who have nothing positive to say, or they just got to call names. What I'd like everyone in Troy to also know that Troy Citizens United is going to have a town hall on April 14th from 7 to 9 at the community center, where we will be able to explain to the people of Troy that we can keep our library and explain a lot of the financial situation of the city. I think that would be good because you can come and listen to our side without people screaming liars at everyone. We've invited elected officials, and our board will present to the citizens what is really going on in the finances of our city. So that's at the community center on April 14th from 7 to 9. Thank you.
That concludes those that signed up to speak this evening. And
I punched a button.
pardon?
I had signed up to speak.
Your name didn't appear here. Come forward. Is it Mr. Bloomingdale?
I did as well, Mayor, but I don't need to talk things too much, but I need as well.
Sir, would you come forward here? No. The gentleman in the front first. Could I remind folks that the reason that we have people sign up out in the hallway is if we have 15 people or more sign up, then we limit the time. Some people are not signing up until late, so that we don't do that with a change in the time frame. I would appreciate that from now on, anyone who wishes to speak at the council meeting, sign up at the kiosk when they come in. Mrs. Stewart is out there to help you if you wish to sign up. Bruce Bloomingdale, go ahead.
I did sign up, Mayor, and I signed up as soon as I got here, which...
Well, didn't appear. I'm just indicating. Go ahead.
Well, I want to tell each and every one of you, the 7 up here, I appreciate every one of you. I find you to be have a tremendous amount of integrity. I think that you work extremely hard, and for the life of me, I don't know why. Although it's a good city, and I guess it's worth the effort. I attended, I think, 6 meetings and a half of 2 more. I think I sat at a table with every one of you. I found you to be articulate, each one of you, informed, have the ability to discuss the issues that were presented to you, sometimes in a very hostile manner and sometimes as an inquiry. I appreciate you listening. I appreciate what you've done with these public engagement conversations. And I think they've had a lot of I think they've had a lot of value. I'd like to share with you some of my impressions of those meetings. First of all, I think there's an awakening within a segment of our society. I would identify him as the old 25 to 40-year-old segment, and these are not universal statements. Obviously, there's going to be people that don't fit. I'm just talking my impressions. But generally, they seem to me, as the people sitting at my table, to be the ones that were what I call seekers, had children, evidently, because they were concerned about some of the school issues, not understanding that that's not the forum that they have to address that in. Moved to the city for the same reasons that I did, and I'm sure that a lot of us did. I sat probably at 8 tables or more. There were probably 10 to 12 people on an average at each table. Out of that group, 4 to 6 roughly, give or take, depending on the table, were in their 50s, 60s, and probably my age. Seemed to be long-term residents generally, somewhat or too well informed about the city and the issues in it. Had concerns. The one that seemed to dominate most of the conversation was the library, the historical museum, police and safety, taxes, and so on. Out of the 10 or 12 people, I would say there were anywhere from 2 to 3 that what I identified as being seekers, people looking for information, finding it difficult to get it because of the headbutting by what I'm going to call the disruptors, whose tactics were uniform. If they couldn't talk over you, they'd quote a bunch of figures. If you challenged them on the figures, it prolonged the conversation. And I've seen some of those seekers leave with a little frustration. And I talked to a few of them after the fact and said, stay here. Stay in the game. You guys are important. And then the last person at the table was people like me, the returners. I enjoyed it, participated in it, I think it was worthwhile. The way we used our time. 10 to 15 minutes, you know what, I see my light on, I'm just going to go to the conclusion. Council, based on what I saw and what have you, I'd like to suggest these things, and they're a formulation of my own ideas and what I thought people, the majority were saying, people sitting at the table were saying. Please continue your evaluation of input. The ICMA reports, these meetings, the phone surveys, and collect your data. Financial data, projections, what have you. With that then, please develop a plan that wraps up all aspects of our city. Holistic, I use that word several times in the meetings I was in, that incorporates everything. We have a lot of divisiveness in this town over this particular issue, that, and what have you. Now, if a majority of you are convinced that the current budget will not include the library, then I would ask that you use the vote that you have to keep it open and let the naysayers be damned. Put your plan on the August, I'd encourage you to put your plan on the August ballot to avoid the obvious confusion that's going to take place in the November ballot. And I would suggest that you continue and even intensify the education of the public in our city, because I think that it's worthwhile and I think it's going to be effective. Thank you.
Thank you. Neil Uzansky? Neil?
Thank you, Mayor. I apologize. I did erroneously sign up for the public hearing, not the public comment, so again, I apologize. Good evening, Mayor and City Councilmen, as well City Council people, as well as esteemed city employees. I had an interesting conversation with, I'm sure you guys all remember my kids. You're very polite and patient with them, and I appreciate that. Had a conversation with them when we got back, and so they wanted to know, well, is the library saved yet? And, fortunately we had to have a little bit of an adult conversation that, well, no, it's kind of complicated. And we had, a conversation, well, can they do this? Could they just have the library be open for a little while? And I said, well, maybe, but our library service depends on agreements whereupon we keep the library open for a certain amount of time. And, well, they said, well, can't people just pay more? And I said, well, they tried that, and unfortunately the election didn't go the way that we had hoped it did. And unfortunately I hear people who have kind of similar concerns who are, maybe a little bit late to the game. I don't blame them. It's a busy life that we live in. It's not easy to stay up to all the up-to-date things of what's going on with the city. But people want to say, well, let's keep the library open for 15 or 20 hours, and that's really not a serious approach to this problem. I mean, we have to fund the library in a way which it maintains its accreditation. And I said, Ariella, would you choose police or library? And she kind of looked at me and she said, well, I don't know. I don't know either, honestly. I would have to say, if I had to choose, I would choose police over library, as terrible as that choice is. And I think it's a false choice, because I think that we have the capacity to pay for it within our city. We've paid for it in the past. People's property values have gone down a lot, and that does present challenges, but people's incomes haven't gone down as much as our property values have, as well as the revenue sharing that's really been an impact here. So, I know that when I encouraged my daughter to do this, I wish I could take credit for all that happened here. It was really, if anything, I married an exceptional woman, and I'll take credit for that. But I think that it was really through each one of my kids' ingenuity and hard work and their sacrifice of their time. And I think that's what we really need right now, is we need a sacrifice in our city, and we need to decide where that sacrifice is going to come from, because I don't think we should be funding the library as an emergency. It's not an emergency, and if we can't plan to finance a library, I'm sorry to say, but I don't think we're very good at planning. And I don't mean to disparage the city council or the mayor. I know you guys are working hard, and I bet you guys on a good day could manage this city with one arm tied behind your back. But it's not a good time, and unfortunately, I believe that your arm was tied behind your back when they limited your ability to raise the millage as elected leaders, and they decided that the concept of popular sovereignty should reign. And it's a good concept. We need the support of our elected officials. They need to be represented by the people. But I don't think anybody realized they were signing up to micromanage the city, to say, well, have you sought 10% concessions from all the staff? Oh yeah, actually they are right now. That's built in the budget. There's a 10% concession. Well, did you try reducing so you're not buying as many library materials and you're not keeping the staff open? Yeah, actually that's how we're keeping the library open now. So I know you guys have tried to make a number of cuts, and I'll be brief because I know I wasn't on the agenda, but I again want to just thank you, as the previous speaker did, for your service towards our city. I know that you don't take your jobs lightly, and I know that every decision you make is right now a really tough one. So I just wanted to say thank you again for your service to the city. And one thing that I did want to note, that I work in the elections, and I just heard that our deputy city clerk, Barb Pilata, has left the city, and I don't know if people understand how much of a loss that is. That is a huge loss. She was so talented in terms of elections, and I think people might find out what happens if we go from having a professional city staff to having an amateurish city staff. When people come to vote, it's going to take a long time, and our results may not be available right away, and if there's problems, it may take a long time to solve, and that's what happens if you don't invest our city. And I would remind people, if we as residents don't invest in our city, I don't know how we're going to expect people to buy a new property and invest in our city. Thanks again for your time.
That concludes those that wanted to speak under public comment. So we'll go to response for public comment. And before I ask the others, I want to respond to Neil's comment just now with regarding our deputy city clerk. She, to clarify for people, she took a position as a city clerk, not a deputy city clerk, in Independence Township, which is near her home. We still do have professional, capable, talented people in the city clerk's office, including the two people that are with us right now, and our city clerk, Tony Bartholomew, happens to be on vacation this week because this is when the kids are off from school. So I want to clarify that Mrs. Pilata's leaving had to do with her seeking being a city clerk, and a position was open in Independence Township, and she won that position. And yes, she is very capable. Is there anyone else that wants to ask staff or to respond to public comment? Some of the things I think maybe we're going to talk about when we as a council talk in a study session about the community conversations at the end. I realize that this was the public's opportunity to do it at this time. Anybody?
Mayor?
Councilman Howard?
I noted a couple things here. One is that there was a reference to a 47% reduction in head count. And what I see in our comprehensive annual financial report, I see full-time positions at 476 in 2001 and part-time positions at 180. In fiscal year 2010, ending last June 30th, which is the last full fiscal year that we have available, I see 443 full-time positions and 496 part-time positions. So perhaps he and I can meet offline and get our numbers straight. The other item that I noted was a reference to a private conversation that one of the speakers had with my father, and I would suggest that, if we're going to make personal attacks on people, that we give them the benefit of the rebuttal, meaning that if there was a private conversation where the claim was made, that the rebuttal be made in private as well. And this is the same individual who contacted me about other members of my family in a most uncharitable manner. And I don't think that personal attacks are warranted, and I don't believe that there's any place for them in public discourse. You can dislike my positions, you can dislike my votes, but do not attack my family. Do not attack my wife. Do not attack my parents. Do not attack my family. And I would never attack even my worst enemy's spouse or family. I think that's disgusting. I think it's worse than disgusting. I think it's evil.
And anyone else on response to public comment? Mr. Zerlag?
Thank you. Just want to make a response. Some folks alluded to the budget being the manager's or management's budget. Frankly, the 3-year budget was my idea, and I am proud of the City Council for embracing it and selecting a course of action that assures that we're here 3 years from now. It's a balanced budget. After that, it's your budget. There was a series of options that we went through. We answered all kinds of questions. Core competencies were identified and legislated by this governing body. And frankly, you can do what you like with this budget. We have a 3-year budget. Council wanted to have a quarterly approval of that budget, so I said to myself, well, is that one 3-year budget, or is that now 12 3-month budgets? That's up to you. Of course, the state of Michigan will have something to say about adopting at least one fiscal year budget, and you can do that. You have to adopt a fiscal year budget at least one fiscal year at a time. You can go back to having a 1-year budget. Most cities in the state of Michigan do have a 1-year budget. Southfield is trying to secure binding to the tune of about $40 million because they do not believe in laying people off, and they're trying to get a bond issue for general operating. I would not recommend that as an option. But again, you can certainly do what you like. It's not management's budget, it's your budget.
Any other responses?
Madam Mayor.
Mayor Pro Tem Kerwin?
Councilmember Harlech asked about, in general, the difference between our employees, say, in 2010 and this year. I was wondering specifically in terms of the library, some of the cost savings that we saw this year in the library had to do with how few full-time staff we have, how few...
Yes, we are down to 6 full-time people in the Troy Public Library as a result of our closure on Saturdays. Back in our heyday, when we were the #1 library in the state, we had 13 full-time people. If you took a look at the number of full-timers we had against the volume, by comparison, our employees did and still do a phenomenal job. There's a certain cost inherent in running the library. The numbers are not in front of me, but my guess is that I could have robots work for free, and it would still cost over $1 million to operate the library, just because of books and programming and heat, light, and electricity and so forth.
We're very grateful to our trained volunteers who work in the library every single day. Madam Mayor, if I may.
Mayor Pro Tem Kerwin.
I think that one of the challenges that we face that's different than, say, a small business where things, situations indicate then we'll let people go because we're not making as many, whatever it is, we're not selling as much. The library today, in fact, goes through the same amount of books, in fact, offers more services for those who are seeking employment and are trying to do that, is the only place for early literacy within this community. We noticed in the census data that we haven't shrunk for the amount of people. In fact, I think we're the only growing city in Oakland County, not by much, but nevertheless, that 29 or so folks, we're not getting smaller. So with a lower revenue share, with a smaller amount, we're asked to supply the same services. And I heard that a lot from those who spoke tonight. Just keep doing what you're doing. I watched recently Where Our Taxes Go with Kent Voigt on our city channel, and it was just a couple years ago that was made. The average household at that time paid $1,159 in taxes to the city of Troy. This year it's $909.69. That's about $75 a month for all the services that are supplied. It's hard to continue to supply all of the services that people long for and desire when there is less, and less. less from our own residents, less from the county, and less from the state. I know it's very important for those who said that the library, for example, could operate more than enough money in there. There isn't. There is less, and less is painful for all of us. Thank you.
Anyone else? Okay, then we'll go to regular business. Boards and committee appointments. I move that we appoint the following individuals to serve on the Planning Commission. 2 reappointments, Don Edmonds to a term expiring December 31st, 2013. Mark Maxwell for a term expiring December 31st, 2013. And a new appointment to the Planning Commission, Tom Cred, with a term expiring December 31st, 2013.
Support.
Moved by the chair, seconded by Mayor Pro Tem Kerwin. Discussion? The vote, Mrs. Bittner?
Councilmember Beltramini?
Yes.
Fleming?
Yes.
Howlerleck?
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Kerwin?
Yes.
Councilmember McGinnis?
Yes.
Slater?
Yes.
Mayor Schilling?
Yes. Motion passes, and Mr. Krent is in the audience, and we welcome you to the Planning Commission and the hard work that's ahead of you and the work with the members that are presently serving. Thank you for your service. There are no council appointments this evening, so our next is the 3-year 2010-11, 2012-13 revised budget spring 2011 update. And there is a resolution on the table. We had requested reports quarterly, and we've received that, and then some council members requested that there be a resolution to accompany that report, and that's why it's before us this evening. Do we have a resolution so we can have a discussion?
Madam Mayor, I'll read it into the record.
Mayor Pro Tem Kerwin.
Whereas the City of Troy's financial challenge is not only about controlling expenditures, it is about forecasting revenues. And whereas it is imperative that Troy's organizational structure matches its declining revenue stream. And whereas advancing solutions 1 year at a time is not a solution, as the financial challenge spans more than 1 year. And whereas the best practices of adopting a 3-year balanced budget addresses financial challenges over a longer time horizon, thus advising the community what level of service can be expected or not expected over the next 36 months. And whereas the City of Troy took control of its future by adopting a 3-year balanced budget on May 10th, 2010, and whereas these budgets were forecast to utilize an aggregate amount of fund balance estimated at $4,900,000 to balance budgets for fiscal years 2010-11, 2011-12, and 2012-13. And whereas the attached budget revision has been calibrated to reflect updates in accordance with the attached memorandum from City Manager John Zerlag and Assistant City Manager Finance and Administration John Lamorato. And whereas these calibrations still result in a utilization of fund balance in the aggregate of approximately $3,768,504 for fiscal year 2010-11, 2011-12, and 2012-13. Now therefore be it resolved that the Troy City Council hereby adopt the revised 3-year budget 2010-11, 2012-13, and that a copy be attached to the original minutes.
Do we have a second?
I'll support it.
Moved by Mayor Pro Tem Kerwin, seconded by Councilwoman McGinnis, that we approve the resolution as printed and read. Discussion?
Mayor?
Councilman Fleming?
Yeah, I was encouraged by the revenue trends, and actually the residential class is realizing lesser reduction although we're still having some issues with commercial and industrial classes of property. But licenses and permits were up, estimates. So I think every month that goes by, we learn a little bit more. And the budget is not as bleak as we had considered earlier. So I think we've got some good news here. It's not all bad. And I do agree with one of the speakers, I don't know who tonight, that said a vote for this budget now really is, closing the door on the library May 1st. And I don't think any of us want to see that happen, and certainly, I just don't think we need to do that. So I know that we have some more work to do. We're going to be going into budget sessions and a lot of work in the next few weeks, but I would like to offer an amendment to this. Resolve that the Troy City Council hereby amends the revised 3-year 2010, 2011, 2012, 2013 spring 2011 update to reallocate $2.1 million to fund the Troy Library until July the 1st, 2012.
Moved by Councilman Fleming. Do we have a second to the amendment?
Second.
Moved by Councilman Fleming, seconded by Councilman Howard. Discussion of the amendment.
Madam Mayor?
Councilwoman Beltramini?
I don't disagree with the idea of moving some fund balance to fund the library. I hesitate to do it in this forum, in this format, for the following reason, and that is, I know that the pot is finite, and I don't disagree with management's numbers at all. And I am a little disconcerted that the allocation in fund balance is actually growing. And that bothers me a little bit when times are tough. You have a savings account so that you can persevere when times are tough. However, I think to do it in this format, in this way, tonight. Okay, $2 million comes out of fund balance. Then next week it's going to be something else, and in 3 weeks it's going to be something else. I think we need a holistic approach, and I continue to believe that balancing a budget by amputation of signature services is not in the best interest of the future of our community. I would much rather see, as I said a year ago, a shared sacrifice approach to our budget. And I know also that that would mean that none of our services would be signature services any longer. But we would have well-rounded services. And that is part of what has made Troy a place that people want to move to. So until the pot can be appropriately reallocated, I have a problem with just taking $2 million from somewhere. That's my deal. I know all these numbers are going to change in 3 weeks as well. Management is going to give us an update and another proposal. And I do believe that there is, if there are people who actually want to see a more shared value approach on the budget, that resolution can come separately tonight.
Further discussion of the amendment.
Mayor?
Councilman Howard?
I actually want just some clarification on Councilwoman Beltramini's comments. So if, two things. One is I am curious about the resolution for shared sacrifice and what form that would take. And then the other, actually I have a couple of questions. That's one question. The other is it looks like our fund balance usage is declining, at least in the 3 years. And I'm not sure if I misheard you, but I thought you said it was increasing. But the other question I would have is what should we do with the main resolution on the table if the amendment is not good, especially so close to the budget process? Those are my follow-up questions. If I could ask my colleague here.
Okay. Our council, I need your assistance with this, because usually our rules are that anyone who hasn't spoken gets to speak before we go back to another person to speak. So is there anyone that wants to speak on the amendment before we go back to Councilman Beltramini? I do have something to say on it, and so I will take the opportunity to say it, and then I'll call on Councilman Beltramini. If council members will look on the first page of the memo, March 23rd, from Mr. Zerlag and Mr. Lamorato, it talks about the reappropriation of fund balance, and it says the 2011-12 budget will require a $2.2 million reappropriation of fund balance compared to an original estimate of $1.8 million. So that is an increase of the reappropriation in order to balance the budget. Then the 2012-13 budget calls for a reappropriation of $0.8 million, the same amount as originally estimated. And it should be noted that the 2012-13 reappropriation is coming entirely from the general fund unassigned fund balance. And then it goes on to explain where that is coming from. So actually, in order to have a balanced budget, we must be using, over the next 3 years, money from the fund balance. I realize that numbers will change over the 3-year time period, but when we have our budget discussions in April, the last week of April, and then the first week of May, we're going to go over everything again and have the latest numbers. I would not be in favor of the amendment this evening, nor would I be in favor of an amendment which would change the structure, because I truly feel that there are some basic needs that are equally as important as the library. As we discuss all of these things, I have always felt that the total provision of services in this community is what this council should be looking at, and we need to look at the total picture and not be picking one area over another. Anyone else? Councilman Beltramini? You want to? Councilman Fleming? Yes.
Councilman Slater.
I'm sorry, I was listening for people asking for the floor, so if someone wants the floor. Councilman Slater.
Yeah, I have to agree with your statement. Once again, it looks to me like some people are looking at putting a Band-Aid on an open wound and trying to get through a year when we need to be looking at a 3-year budget. And when you look at a 3-year budget in its totality, you can't take $2.1 million out of this fund balance. It will damage you in the years ahead. But I listened to what Councilwoman Beltramini said. I'd also like to ask the question, that's a general statement about across-the-board cuts. I would ask if you could be more specific in regard to that also.
Is there anyone that hasn't spoken on the amendment that wishes to speak before I go back for seconds?
Madam Mayor.
Councilwoman McGinnis.
I would definitely not feel comfortable supporting the amendment as it was laid out by Councilman Fleming at this time. I expressed some concern earlier today about the process, I guess, in terms of reviewing the budget quarterly, and I know it's a new process. Obviously, the timing, it seems like everyone is preparing for what we're going to be doing in the coming weeks in terms of the budget for 11-12, and it seems as though we didn't equally space out the way that we were going to be addressing this during the year. And I'm comfortable with that because I know it's the first year that we're doing it, and hopefully we'll make sure that we've got the best practice going for us as we continue to move forward with the 3-year budget, which I'm planning to do. I guess the other thing that makes me uncomfortable is that we're talking about these numbers, but they're all still in the negative. So I personally feel like we're kind of talking about very big numbers, 4.9 million and the 1.7 million that we're talking about, but the practice that we're furthering at any point by digging deeper into this is that we're continuing to spend money that we technically don't have, which I think is, or it's not something that we've budgeted for, and I think that that's a problem when we're looking at practices, financial practices for the city, and I don't know if it's something that John Zerlag would like to address or John Lamarato would like to address, but I was under the understanding that this is a practice that we were trying to avoid because it's not something that gives us stability with our finances, and I don't know if that's something that we're revisiting as a policy here, but I think that that's important to address, and I'm sure it will be done in the budget sessions, or perhaps if there's additional comment that could be made tonight from John Lamarato as well. But I think that that is something that needs to be made very clear.